Some important trends that we saw while doing our analysis in the European sports tech market. And I mean, we've been seeing this for a while on all our channels. We've seen this as a mega trend. Ben talked about it earlier as well. Fitness content and esports. That is, these are the three things that are driving investment in the world of sports technology, kind of geography agnostic. In the US, you could probably add betting as a major topic. In Asia, we talk about fantasy sports as another major topic, which is specific to India. But otherwise, these three topics, and the order that they presented, content, gaming slash esports, and fitness the third, these are the major mega trends globally. Now, what is happening within each of those trends and what is happening within that geography? For example, in Europe, on the content side, there's a huge demand for video content. We're seeing that in a number of ways, from behind the scenes content to match content and match and training content at the elite and lower levels, and even individual training content. That's another thing we're seeing a lot of. So rise in activity, and what are the startups doing to cater that? We'll get into that a bit. We keep talking about sports and esports and how, like, what's the differences, and especially how much sports is learning from esports a lot. There are tons of examples of this. We're going to pick up a couple of really innovative ones that we have seen in the last year or so. And the third one, we talked about it earlier, the growth of connected fitness devices. But what is next beyond it? And mixed reality fitness, or XR gaming, which is the term that is being bandied about a lot. We'll talk about these next generation devices and new age fitness devices that we're seeing a lot in Europe. But all right, let's start with the demand for video content. And as always with our reports, we talk about each geography in the context of another, like what can we learn and what is happening across different regions. And the first thing that we know, specifically in Europe, is that Netflix and Amazon Prime have invested a lot in sports content, and not just linear storytelling of what happened was following a season in review kind of situation, which would happen, has been happening for ages, right? Formula One used to do that every year. BBC would publish their, okay, this happened in race one, this happened in race two, there was a bit of drama, etc. And in a linear way, tell the story, primarily focusing on the top of the grid and forgetting the rest. But no, Drive to Survive has turned that on its head. It's almost like the championship doesn't really matter in that show. It's about the stories within the stories within the stories. The two teammates who are competing, or of a transfer between teams, of a driver moving somewhere, an engine manufacturer moving somewhere, which might seem like, yeah, what the big deal is, but to fans, that is the content that is really interesting. So we're seeing Netflix, Amazon invest a lot in this, right? From All or Nothing, which is a big series, Drive to Survive, I mentioned, there's a big list on that side. And this is also following a big mega trend. Like, the big boys are spending a lot of money in sports content. I mean, there's a long list of series, and there are more that are announced constantly. I mean, for me, I remember at the start of the lockdown last year, Ben and I had so much fun on every Monday just talking about what happened with Michael Jordan and on Netflix the previous Sunday night. Last Dance helped a lot of people through the early part of the pandemic. And now that is getting deeper and deeper. In other sports, we're seeing cycling, we're seeing MotoGP, which just launched their series on Netflix recently. Now, what does that mean further for startups? Yeah, actually, some really big US media platforms are following that trend. Barstool Sports raised 163 million at the start of last year, well, it was January, to talk about what is happening in the world of sports outside of the pitch, the field, the arena. The Athletic, which again does some fantastic deeper storytelling, they raised 50 million last year. We had Overtime, another media app. They kind of think of themselves as a media channel where they create original shows and content about these athletes, but like talking to them about like their childhood or even just their sneaker collection or things like that. Overtime, in fact, just last week announced that they raised $80 million as well. House of Highlights is another one which makes it more user-generated content, right? They're relying on their vast Instagram channel page where users keep sending videos of them doing all sorts of funny things, trick shots, lucky shots, imitating real athletes. So there's a bunch of content that has been really, really well received in the US, and there's a lot of those opportunities also coming across to Europe. And the third part of it, I talked about it earlier, is training and matches, it should also say, but content for each type of individual. It's not just about what's happening at the elite level. It's like, hey, what is happening with my local team? Is that content being streamed enough? Is that reaching a wide enough audience for the lower leagues and grassroots football? That is for the matches, but also for the training. Everybody recording themselves, doing all sorts of training drills, using all the apps that they have. There are so many of those. Home court. In football, there are quite a few in Berlin, B42, and in Germany, I should say B42, etc., which create these kind of training programs. And this also creates content which has a lot of value and can be shared. So the point is that there are different types of content pieces. There's really high value production, which happens at the elite level. There is some kind of user generated content, which fans are creating and sharing amongst themselves. There are athletes themselves creating training, matches, all that kind of content. But all of this has an audience. And what have we seen in Europe? Well, a lot of big companies have spent a lot of money in 2020. 11 Sports acquired MyCujo. I don't believe the value is disclosed, but MyCujo, I mean, should be a familiar name to most people. I mean, I believe in 2019 they showed over 22,000 matches, 26 million, so 25 to 30 million users are coming onto their platform and what streaming live from MyCujo. They're in over 100 countries. So that's a pretty big business that 11 Sports acquired in 2020, at the end of 2020. Why? Because they also were digital rights holders. They had the rights to stream and distribute all those base level all these matches from all over the world, which each have a tiny, tiny audience. Even if those 22,000 matches have an audience of, I don't know, 100 people, 1,000 people, that's a really, really big audience that you're reaching. It's over 20 million people that you can tap into. So it's not about finding that one match which reaches 20 million people. It's finding about a lot of other games. So 11 Sports did that with MyCujo. They also kind of absorbed Othro. Othro was set up with a lot of fanfare, 50 million pounds in investment. 2 years ago, all the big names signed: Neymar, Beckham, Mbappe. They had a lot of big name footballers, Zidane, all signed, and they were going to do a lot of behind the scenes content with each of these footballers. Then I guess all the footballers just kind of got active on their own social media platforms. So it felt like, why do we have to come to a new platform to follow these footballers? They were all getting more active at the same time. So a lot of that money that was spent in Outro seemed to kind of disappear. Well, 11 Sports picked them up, and it seems like they're pivoting into like an MTV Cribs style. That's what they're talking about, where they're going to go into the houses of all these athletes and present, again, just content from their personal lives. That's a whole direction that 11 Sports, which is a really, really well-funded company, is going in. Minute Media, you heard that name earlier, raised 40 million last year. Their agenda with that is to create more publishing platforms where they're going to bring on more user-generated content, maybe along the lines of House of Highlights. Not sure yet, but that's a direction that they want. They want to be a publishing platform where anybody can come in and create and publish content. And also, they've earmarked a lot of that money for acquisitions. So they're being aggressive in this space. One Football, this is a name that you've heard a number of times. They raised 50 million last year, and not only that, acquired Dugout in a pretty big transaction, or pretty important transaction for the industry. And the reason is this: Dugout was born out of basically, I think there was 9 elite clubs, and Marseille joined at the end or something. But coming together to try to create a platform where they can kind of push their content to a wide audience. So we were talking about earlier about football teams, whether they invest or they have different formats. This is another format where big teams, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Juventus, AC Milan, Inter Milan, Arsenal, a bunch of these teams got together to create a platform. They were the founders of Dugout. Now, Dugout got acquired or has been folded into, they have merged. I don't know what the exact terminology they prefer using is, but they are basically together with One Football. One Football has a huge audience of football fans who come there, me included, for a number of years, who come there for news, for match highlight, for match information, transfer news, etc. And now Dugout provides a content arm because they have the rights holders on their board. So they now allow OneFootball to take the Dugout content and distribute that to their audience. So again, the play of making content available to large audiences seemed really interesting to all these parties. So on the startup side, we're seeing a lot of activity around the content space. Well, let's say on the startup side, these are more established companies, but you're seeing the rights holders, that's the football team, the sports teams, they're either working with content or media partners such as Netflix or Amazon Prime, or they're working with startup formats by amongst themselves, such as Dugout, bringing in partners who have a large audience, such as OneFootball. That's one format. You have a media company, which is 11 Sports, now acquiring another company which has rights for a whole bunch of additional content. Why? Because they want to reach wider audiences, because they find that interesting. Minute Media investing in user-generated content. Perhaps that's the way that they will go. So lots of different formats that we're seeing coming into play, but all of these formats are coming out only for one reason, because the demand is there. All sports fans, and even more than just sports fans, guys, like people like you and I perhaps, really want to see more of what's going on. There are tons more people, millions perhaps, like us. And that's why these platforms really are seeing a lot of traction, especially in 2020. All right, so that was on, I think Rita's got a question, but it's not so much about content, so maybe I'll come to that question later. Instead, I'll spend some time talking about esports. All right, so yeah, esports was big. Esports was big during the pandemic. Verizon released a report. This is, of course, American data, but I think it's still relevant and comfortable. Verizon released a report towards the end of 2020 that gaming traffic through the pandemic, especially during March, April, the early months of lockdown, gaming traffic increased by 75%, whereas video traffic, YouTube, Netflix, whatever, increased by 12%, and web traffic increased by 20%. Which means to say that everybody was doing a lot more of all the stuff that they were doing, but they were doing a lot more gaming than anything else. So there's more gaming and chill than Netflix and chill, perhaps, was the trend during the early part of the pandemic. But that's not inconsistent from what we know. I mean, we've read various reports of esports seeing a big boom during 2020, and there are some other reasons for it. For example, esports tournaments did not suffer, esports events did not suffer as much as live sports events. Of course, they don't have the arenas, they don't have the restrictions of fans in places. So, tournament platforms, tournament organizers, they were still able to execute whatever they wanted to do. At the same time, gain a wider audience because people were at home, and either trying to consume esports either passively or esports/gaming either passively just by watching, or were spending more hours. The gamers were spending more hours on their platforms as well. One stat around that I saw from Twitch, which announced in March 2020 that they saw a week-on-week increase of 10%. And this is Twitch. Twitch is a really big platform. They saw a week-on-week increase of 10% from March almost till the end of the year. That's a big, consistent growth in audience that from a viewership numbers. So what happens as a result? Now, sports has been talking about, hey, we have a lot to learn from esports for a while. For example, the Olympics, of course, announced that they're going to have 5 events, and they're virtual sports, they call it. That's basically what? That's the Olympics trying to figure out a way to include esports in their games. And I think that, I mean, from the sounds of it, it sounds like the format seems pretty right. They've taken 5 events. I think it's cycling, rowing, a couple of others I don't remember right now, but they're going to do mini events around those, and which are wide participation events as well, where they're inviting anybody. So you can compete with some elite like you and I. Anybody could log on to that event. I think it starts on the 23rd of this month, so 1 month before the Olympics, and it'll run for a month, I believe, where you could be competing against elite level athletes virtually, some virtual sports programs, which will happen there. That's one good example in which has been announced very recently. But there are some others as well, especially during the pandemic. We saw Formula One, bring them up again, did a fantastic job of attracting new audiences. What they essentially did, because they didn't have races to broadcast, they were broadcasting virtual races where they had drivers themselves. So the young brigade, you had Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Alex Albon, um, Nicholas Latifi. I don't think Max Verstappen or Pierre Gasly took part, but some of the younger drivers were racing against other esports or F1 esports athletes, right? Guys like Danny Brezene, I want to say his name, probably butchering the Berezne, perhaps butchering his name, but he's a 6'6" Hungarian who probably just because of his height, it's not exactly conducive to getting into a tiny Formula One car, but is super passionate, has turned that passion into an esports career for himself, drives for the Aston Martin esports team, but now he was actually competing alongside these elite drivers. But not only bringing esports stars and the actual Formula One drivers, they also brought in celebrities, which I thought was a really good angle. They had guys like Ben Stokes, Thibaut Courtois, footballers, cricketers, and they were all competing in one race. Which, I mean, I watched some of them. It was quite fun. It was good and engaging way, and they made me an entrenched user. So I can imagine only how could they could attract an even wider audience. That's an example of Formula One. The Burger King Stevenage sponsorship story. I mean, that's not from 2020. That's from before. It's 2019, but is one of the most brilliant marketing activation campaigns I've ever heard of in my life. If you haven't seen this already, please make sure to check it out. But basically, Burger, Burger King sponsored a second division League Two side in England, Stevenage, in real life, just so that Burger King could get on their shirt in the esports FIFA game, right? So they paid the money in real life so that they could appear on the Stevenage shirt in FIFA 2020. And because they did that, they created a whole marketing activation around that, where they were encouraging users to buy a Burger King or whatever, and also then play with Stevenage and then buy Ronaldo and Messi and bring them into their team and take pictures of them in a Stevenage shirt with the Burger King logo super nice and prominent. They had, I believe, over 25,000 goals, which were video clips from goals that were scored in the Stevenage shirts, 1.2 billion impressions of the Stevenage shirt. I mean, this was just a great marketing activation of how you can really connect sports and esports. And on the flip side, this is another interesting story that we found. FC Schalke, who of course now have been relegated, and yeah, there's been quite a lot of action around it, especially for the players being chased around the stadium. I don't know if you saw that story, but that was quite pretty harsh. But FC Schalke might actually be selling their League of Legends. So they have a League of Legends team in the European League of Legends Championship. They might be selling that team because they got relegated in real life. And one of the reasons they could be selling it is because that team is worth 20 million euros to them now. So they could use that as just a way to generate some revenue for the club. They certainly didn't pay anywhere close to that much for that spot. So that's another interesting thing about how the esports sports universes connect. I mean, we've gone far beyond the point of teams and leagues just having participating in esports competition. It's getting much deeper, much richer than that. And we have some really cool startups that we want to give shout outs to, which might help in that process. Friday is a company based in Berlin, which is an AI powered voice assistant for gamers. Leadify does video analysis for aspiring gamers. Another Nordics company. Paris based Powder helps you create moments. We talked about content earlier. Now imagine creating content from your esports games and sharing that virally. And there are so many possible partnerships around any of these topics. for sports teams and esports organizations to combine on. So a lot of interesting ways that these two can come together, we are sure, over the next coming months and years. And the last trend that I want to talk about quickly, we spoke about this earlier, but fitness, right? Connected fitness, it was the theme. I think everybody, pretty much, I would probably say all 50 plus people on this platform downloaded some sort of app at some point in time during the course of 2020 to try some at-home fitness thing. Huge surge in demand for fitness equipment. In fact, in Europe, that little stat on the right, Yahoo Finance showed that, what is it, 6,500% up on steppers and weight benches and exercise bikes. Everybody was buying a lot of equipment. Now, the ones that grew the fastest and possibly grew the most were the connected fitness devices in the US. Just for some context, Peloton's market cap in March 2020 was $5 billion. In the mid-January 2021, so the start of this year, it touched $50 billion, 49 something. It's now around $29 billion. So that company grew a lot in that year. And not just them, you had Mirror, you had Tonal, you had Tempo, you had a bunch of other guys who were all putting out these really cool connected fitness products. But while demand in the US has surged and perhaps knowledge has surged, like everybody's aware of them in Europe, a lot of these products are not available. They're not even able to fulfill their order backlog in the US because demand has surged so much that there's very little chance. I mean, I know Peloton has offices, they do supposedly supply to UK and Germany, but how many of these orders are actually getting shipped out? Apparently, the numbers are pretty low. And some of these other companies are not shipping at all. So, what does that do? It gets a market for B2 products and creates a lot of opportunities in local markets. We have seen, for example, in the exercise bike space, Spanish companies like Volava, Apex Rides, they do something which is very close to Peloton and seeming to find good success with it. Baha, which is interactive screens, similar to what we've seen with Mirror. I mean, I don't know if it's just me that they target with ads, but otherwise it seems like they're spending a lot of money on YouTube and Instagram because I see their ads everywhere. They clearly all the money that they got from Porsche Ventures and Manuel Neuer, who you might have seen in those ads as well. Very cool company with very interesting tech that you hopefully will see on our Hello SportsTech channel at some point soon. But what next, apart from connected fitness? And this is where fitness and mixed reality and virtual reality and AR and VR coming together. We've recently tested a bunch of cool products. Fun with Balls, we spent a day with them in Munich and with Icarus. These are all products that you'll see on our Hello SportsTech channel. But the reason we find them interesting is because they're really at the cutting edge of fitness and mixed reality. This XR gaming, combining gamified fitness experiences and the kind of competition that you can create around that, those are big segments that will continue to grow. XR gaming is going to be a big one. Mark our words. In fact, there's also a XRS Foundation that four of them have started, Sperry, Icarus, Valomotion, and Fun with Balls, of course. Other companies like Jabai. Jabai also, we had a lot of fun testing. It's basically, it's like this street boxer style, street fighter, sorry, I should say, style device, which like you can put it on your glove. It's a boxing device that you punch each other with. Yeah, Ben and I had some fun messing around with that as well. But it's kind of set to the music and tones of Street Fighter. So it really feels like you're playing that video game, the music and the effects and all of that. FitXR is another one with VR-based fitness games. So we're seeing a lot of interesting stuff happening where mixed reality, AR and VR, combined with fitness to produce like this really rich, enhanced experience where you're in the middle of a game, but you're really getting a workout as well. XR gaming is going to be a big thing. Look out for some of these companies.